Greetings, my fellow film-loving thinkers. Thank you for tuning to LL3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful realms of planet Earth. Today's date is Saturday, July 4th, 2026. It's episode 1971. Happy 250th birthday, America. Before I proceed, you can find me on multiple social media sites and podcast channels. Just type in Looky Luck number 3, Looky Luck Roman number 3, which are 3 eyes with a Looky Luck Roman number 3 podcast. In addition, if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, all that good stuff, whatever you do, please use decorum. Hit me via email to ll3.podcast@proton.me if you're donate, go to paypal.me or cash.app/Looky Luck number 3. These United States, 250 years old, has its ups and downs, obstacles, corruption, tyranny, etc. Differences. People have been deprived, but others get inspired. No government is perfect. Period. Instead of folks out there complaining, you gotta do something about it. We all got obligations. We have natural rights that was given to our Creator, regardless of your creed. I just, dawns on me at times. We got all these whiners, complainers, have no merit, never really paid their dues, don't want to better themselves. If you have that mindset, take it somewhere else because you're contaminating space. Even our Declaration of Independence, we're not supposed to trust the government, period. But many people became faction slaves. Their party is better than yours, and vice versa. We'll blame one person for everything. And they'll post stuff that these individuals were great, but one man was horrible. That's what happens when you don't study history, folks. If you don't learn from the past, we damn to repeat it. One thing I can say, too, about the World Cup. I know I am critical on certain elements, like having 3 nations hosting it. It reminds me of the North American Union, Club of Rome agenda. I do recall that has happened around 2002, with Japan and South Korea were the co-host nations of that tournament. However, I noticed too in some of the video footage I've seen, visitors came over and really appreciate what the United States is about. In the fans and getting along. Of course, you're going to have your criminal elements. It's nothing new. One thing that inspires me, I never give up on humanity. And you shouldn't either. Can things be better? Absolutely. We need to learn on improving our lives, decentralizing ourselves. Don't believe in the sweet poly purebred hype from underdog who'll save us all. We all are capable of doing things. We have great talents and a story to tell. One way or the other. Awesome gifts in our bodies and soul, our spirit. That's why I always believe in liberating humanity, not suppressing it. I renounce all forms of statism. It comes in different avenues. Always beware of the plans and provocateurs, the puppets in society. Want us to be divided. I know some post that has one gentleman from pro-African activist wants to burn the American flag. I got a question for that individual. Are you funded by the Rothschilds? Divide and conquer is the game. Many people are getting sick and tired of it. And we need to love ourselves and our neighbors the best we can. If you curse others, wish them ill will, it can backfire on you. I can't stand conscription. That's not my way. That has never been my nature. I knew that when I was a very young person. I was considered emotionally disturbed. But I knew how to conquer. Others wanted to give me that guilt trip complex. I won't say any names. We can do a lot better, absolutely. Beware of the media manipulation. It's been used multiple times, and folks out there, not all, but a great amount, succumb it. Hook, line, and sinker. We all have our mistakes. We learn, not dwell. And even too, what I'm going to say is that live free, regardless what you look like. That's what liberty is about. Freedom and morality, not violate others. And you got sons of bitches out there. Get off on it. They climax on holding people down. Don't believe their hype, their propaganda, their cult-like attributes. And remember, blowback is a bitch when individuals like that thrive on it. And they're the ones to be screaming like a banshee in heat when something happens to them. All right, that's my little rant. And remember, say yes to freedom, no to tyranny, and renounce the global order. All right. So, we're going to talk on a few things here. It mainly came from this site called theamericanthinker.com. And I do admire their work. I can say that. AmericanThinker.com to get subscriptions and all that. And it's mainly going to be talking about Independence Day, the struggles, and verdict. I'll be doing like 3 articles on this, but it's pretty cool in my view. Well, first one I'll be reading here, called How the Founders Celebrate the 4th. Were Independence Day celebrations always so bright and noisy? Pretty much. James D. Best wrote this. This July 4th will be the biggest celebration since the bicentennial. The stars and stripes will be raised. Patriotic music will fill the airways. Grills will ignite all over America, and endless fireworks will block out the stars till late at night. Were Independence Day celebrations always so bright and noisy? Pretty much. The 1787 Constitutional Convention formed a new system of government in the same room where the Declaration of Independence was signed. On July 4th, the delegates took a break from their deliberations to celebrate the 11th anniversary of the historic signing. If you were there, this is what you would have seen. Philadelphia, as the birthplace of the Declaration of Independence, took pride in holding the rowdiest 4th of July gala in the nation. Festivities went on from dawn until deep into the night. The city echoed with public celebrations, ringing bells, and martial music. Every church would conduct special devotionals, and all 117 taverns would compete for revelers with loud entertainment. Formal celebrations started at daybreak, centered in the city commons in front of the State House. One after another, city officials, aspiring orators, and preachers made the customary 13 toasts. The city had distributed kegs of free grog at each corner of the commons, and despite the early hour, toasts had already made the crowd boisterous. Those experienced enough to bring their own tankers threw down swallow after swallow of the watered-down rum. Cannon fires hurt prayers' ears and teared with eyes as concussions pounded in the air. Sulfur and rotten egg odor scratched their throats. After the 13th reports ended, the audience could finally draw a grateful and tranquil breath. But for only a moment, the artillery brigade soon started another round. 3 consecutive resounding salutes of 13 cannon shots. It felt exhausting, with the only relief being another swallow of grog. The Society of the Cincinnati, the City Cavalry, The light infantry and a battalion of militia vied for attention in the center for the commons, while a huge, boisterous crowd churned the periphery. Each military formation, spaced up in its finest regalia, stood eager to demonstrate its parade skills as soon as the artillery finished its noisy salutes. As the commons throbbed with excitement, the delegated to the Constitutional Convention crowded around the second floor windows of Independence Hall to watch the festivities, except at the time people called it the Federal Convention in the State House. On June 28th, Ben Franklin moved for a special sermon on the 4th of July. A simple sermon had exploded into an orchestrated procession from the State House to the Safra Street Church to hear James Campbell. The delegation was led in Grand Marshal style by the Marching Society of the Cincinnati, with Washington in the lead. The society formed ramrod straight columns while the delegates meandered, awkwardly behind their escort of retired military officers. The Safra Street Church reserved the front pews for the delegates. The meeting house was beyond capacity, with every seat taken and many standing in the aisles and along the back. James Campbell was a very young man as he climbed the circular steps to the elevated pulpit. Reverend in training, looked relaxed and at ease. When he spoke, his surprisingly robust voice easily carried his words to the far corners of the meeting house. Gentlemen, the Federal Convention, welcome. I'm gratified that you've come to seek God's guidance in your unprecedented and formidable mission. We all need a little help now and then. Shall we pray? Now, right now, people find it offensive, but who cares, right? After a brief, elegant prayer, Campbell looked over his congregation and spoke in a commanding voice. Gentlemen, your country looks to you with anxious expectations on your decisions. She rests confident that the men who cut the cords for foreign tyranny are also capable of framing a government that will embrace all of our interests. This is our chance for a new beginning. A plan acceptable to the people must remain faithful to the principles of our present government and the American Charter. Any proposition to add kingly power to our federal system should be regarded as treason. Is the science of government so difficult that we do not have men among us capable of unfolding its mysteries and binding the states together by mutual interest and obligations? No, God will not abandon us after shepherding us to freedom. I already see the fabric for a free and vigorous government rising out of the wisdom of the Federal Convention. The Reverend showed no preference for a particular form of government. His intent was to inspire the delegates to rise to the occasion and hold fast to their principles. His confidence was shared by James Madison, who believed a good government design could be deciphered by analyzing ancient and modern systems. Unknown to him at the time, Madison would become known as the father of the Constitution. Our Constitutional Convention finished the work of the Declaration of Independence and the Revolution. We did not go the way of most revolutions that collapse from good intentions without adequate thought about the aftermath. The most illustrious minds of the period sequestered themselves in a hot, stuffy room until a consensus was reached that they had as good as design as possible. When the debate got heated and failure seemed certain, they took a break, celebrated Independence Day, and asked for God's assistance. As James Campbell said, we all need a little help now and then. This gentleman, James D. Best, was an author of Tempest at Dawn. a novelization of the Constitution Convention, Maelstrom. He did a Civil War novel as well, American Exceptions series. Good stuff there. So you got to look at that angle on what they say, what he said. They celebrate it. They had their battles at times, but they celebrate the holiday. We're all going to have differences, folks. Even the men that did the Declaration of Independence. You know, Thomas Jefferson's original document wanted to free all slaves. The Smithsonian Institute don't want you to know that. But you can look it up. Now you got the technology in your fingertips. I did a show on that a while back. Look it up. It's pretty cool. So I did narrate that too in its entirety. But it's always good to know these things. We're gonna hit another one here. America did not have an easy birth. Independence was not guaranteed. This is what J.B. Shirk has to say. 250 years ago, the Second Continental Congress lit the fuse for human freedom by declaring the United States of America independent from Great Britain. And when you read the Declaration of Independence, it was these United States. And I'll just say this: the Lee Resolution was passed July 2nd of 1776 for all 13 free and sovereign states. Declare unification. Although we Americans celebrate the 4th of July as our nation's birthday, our country did not have an easy birth. In July 1776, the men who became known as our founding fathers had many problems. First among them was the reality that not everyone believed the United Colonies of North America, as they were then called, should sever ties with the Crown. During the First Continental Congress, convened in Philadelphia for fewer than 2 months in the early autumn of 1774, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies, Loyalist Georgia did not attend, could not agree how best to respond to Britain's naval blockade of Boston Harbor and Parliament's imposition of the intolerable acts as collective punishment for the Boston Tea Party. Staunch Loyalist and Pennsylvania delegate Joseph Galloway even proposed a plan of union to formally unite Great Britain and the North American colonies. That did not sit well with Massachusetts firebrand Samuel Adams, and the proposal was eventually struck from the official record of the proceedings. Following the April 19, 1775 battles of Lexington and Concord, the first armed conflicts in America's war for independence, colonial delegates reconvened in Philadelphia on May 10th. For the next 14 months, the Second Continental Congress debated what to do next. Formal separation from Great Britain remained a contentious issue. Even after fighting in Massachusetts had begun, most American colonists resisted calls for independence throughout 1775. However, public support for the cause of liberty grew as Christian ministers exhorted members of their congregations to recognize the fight against political tyranny as a struggle for God-given rights and the duty to pursue his will and our happiness here on earth. Patriots of Massachusetts and Virginia worked tirelessly to shift public sentiment throughout the colonies and to persuade each colony's representatives that the time for revolution has arrived. Then anonymously authored 47-page essay was published in Philadelphia on January 10, 1776, written by Thomas Paine, addressed to the inhabitants of America. Its title was simple, Common Sense, described by recently deceased historian Gordon Wood as the most incendiary and popular pamphlet of the entire Revolutionary era. It remains the best-selling American work of all time. In the first half of 1776, American colonists read aloud from its pages in taverns and secret meetings, places while British soldiers passed on nearby streets. Colonial sentiment quickly transformed from hopes to reconciliation with Britain to fervent cries for independence. Paine ignited in Protestant Christians a passion that united the colonies in a righteous war for freedom against the crown. You can say Thomas Paine was an info warrior for his time. After the Virginia Convention, then meeting in Williamsburg, instructed its delegates to the Continental Congress to push for independence. Richard Henry Lee proposed this motion in Philadelphia on June 7th. resolved that these colonies are and of the right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from the allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is ought to be totally dissolved. A year back and forth, debate was finally brought to a head. Although the mood among delegates to the Second Continental Congress had shifted toward general acceptance that a war against Britain was inevitable, unanimity was far from certain. The colonial governments of Delaware, Britain, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, South Carolina had not authorized their delegates to vote for independence. Lee's resolution was therefore tabled for 3 weeks so that delegates could return home and make the case for a formal declaration of independence. After a trial vote on July 1st indicated that South Carolina and Pennsylvania will vote against Lee's resolution, and that Delaware's vote was split between two delegates presented in Philadelphia. South Carolina's Edward Rutledge requested that the official vote be postponed until the following day. What happened next is the part of history that often gets left out of textbooks. Between Monday and Tuesday, Benjamin Franklin strongly suggested to two of his fellow Pennsylvania delegates that they be absent for the final vote. Rutledge managed to convince South Carolina's delegates to flip in favor of independence. Meanwhile, Delaware's pro-independence delegate, Thomas McKean, had already dispatched an urgent letter to Caesar Rodney, Delaware's third delegate to the Continental Congress, and a consummate patriot in favor of independence. Rodney was 80 miles away in Kent County, training Delaware's militia and providing General George Washington's Continental Army with needed supplies. He was also suffering from a serious facial cancer that took his life 8 years later at the age of 55. McKean's letter arrived in Dover on Monday, July 1st. Rodney, realizing that he was the tie-breaking vote for Delaware, did not hesitate. Disregarding warnings from the physicians treating his cancer, he mounted his horse and took off. Through thunderstorms and lightnings, Rodney rode through the night over poor roads and across wild terrain. Stopping only once to change the horses, he made it to Philadelphia in 18 hours, a trip normally required 2 full days. Just as voting in Philadelphia began, delegates heard heavy hoofbeats on the cobblestone outside of the Pennsylvania State House, now Independence Hall. Exhausted still in his riding clothes with spurs attached, covered in mud, wearing a green silk scarf around his cancer-hidden face, Rodney strode in and took his seat. As I believe the voice of my constituents and all sensible and honest men is in favor of independence, Rodney announced. As my own judgment concurs with them, I give my vote for independence. His faithful ride secured Delaware's vote for the cause of liberty. Next time you find a Delaware state quarter in your pocket, take a look at the man riding on a galloping horse. That's Caesar Rodney. Virginia, Richard Henry Lee's resolution for independence secured support from 12 of the 13 colonies, with New York's delegates abstaining from the vote as they still lacked formal approval from their colonial government, an error remedied 7 days later when it voted tardily to join with the other colonies in supporting independence. Unanimity among the colonies was important. It deprived the British of the opportunity to exploit colonial divisions. It also demonstrated to the American people that the colonies were united in purpose. The history of the War for Independence could have been much different had the delegates to the Second Continental Congress not found a way to come together. The Pennsylvania Evening Post reported on July 2nd, this day the Continental Congress declared the United Colonies free and independent states. John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail, the second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I'm apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as a great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other. From this time forward, forever move. The American people, on the other hand, immediately recognized July 4th, the day of the Declaration of Independence, was unanimously ratified and the first published by a local printer as America's Independence Day. The delegate to the Second Continental Congress committed acts of high treason against the crown, crimes punishable by torture and death. We Americans celebrate their treason every day on this day. Our country was birthed in adversity, nourished on liberty, christened as the land of opportunity, guided by God, and preserved by his blessings. 250 years later, let us pray for the 250 more. Happy Independence Day. Hat tip to John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, who died 200 years ago today. Yes, even Caesar Rodney went through rough terrain and conditions just to get his vote of endorsing sovereignty, separation from Great Britain. He didn't complain. He didn't whine. That's what ruggedness is all about. That's what liberty is. Not complaining, get stuff handed to you. Earn it. I don't take things for granted. Never had. People try to assume that, but I underestimate them. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else, but like I said before, we all got great gifts and a story to tell. And I want to do one more, just from the same publication, and this was written by Armando Simon. A verdict on the American experiment. Success or failure? Here is your answer. From the very beginning and for the century afterward, Americans often refer to the country as an experiment, and for very good reason. At the time, almost all civilizations were monarchies. Indeed, many Europeans expected Washington to become a king of the colonies, or at the least dictator, and were surprised when he did not even try. They were just as surprised when he stepped down from the presidential office, thereby cementing a peaceful transition of power. A minority of Americans also considered a monarchy out of habit. The type of government that Americans had concocted was a novelty. Initially, soon after declaring independence without achieving it, they cobbed all together the Articles of Confederation, a perpetual union. In reaction against authoritarian government, they created a government without any authority. After independence, it proved worthless, what James Madison referred to as, in fact, nothing more than a treaty of amity, of commerce, and of alliance. Between so many independent and sovereign states, the Dutch Republic, Amphithyonic League. I tongue-tied there. Hey, don't worry, I love learning words, new words myself. Hope I pronounced that, please. Forgive me if I didn't. And the Swiss Confederacy were similarly organized with mixed outcomes. Indeed, some of the states' governments thought of declaring war on others over boundaries and trade. It must be kept in mind that people consider themselves Americans and Virginians or Georgians, etc. They still do. They tried again, but what to create? The reader should not make the commission of mistake of thinking the present form of government was inviolable and logical. It could have taken any number of forms. The founding fathers, like all educated people, were well versed in the history of ancient Greece and Rome. Particularly Madison had examined the forms of government that had previously existed, thereby learning the lessons of history. Democracy was out of the question because of the sheer size of the country. Leaving dictatorships, oligarchies, and monarchies aside, they settled on a republic. but of what form? For example, to avoid dictatorship, Rome had two consuls, presidents who alternated days when wielding power. Each region had its own concern and identity. How much authority should the executive have? And how far could it extend? How much Congress and how far? What guaranteed was there was a central government would not eliminate freedoms. What guarantee was there for the central government to veto state laws? Large states such as Virginia and Pennsylvania thought it absurd that tiny states should have the same importance as them, as in the Senate, whereas small states thought they would be ignored if representation went by population size, as in the House of Representatives. Hence the bicameral legislature and the electoral college. Can the central government carry out actions not specifically outlined in the Constitution? That's the question. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison were of the opinion that did not. Jefferson jettisoned this principle with the Louisiana Purchase, even though there was nothing in the Constitution about purchasing additional territory. Eventually, the Founding Fathers crafted the Constitution and sent to all the states to ratify. Unanimously, ratification was not a certainty, which is why Hamilton, Madison, and Jay put out a series of articles in newspapers giving the reasons for ratification. Specifically, they used Roman noms de plume. You could say, a la the Federalist Papers. There could have been a United States of America without, say, Connecticut. Some states announced they would not join unless a Bill of Rights was included. Once the government was in session and the first 10 amendments were passed, some of the holdouts joined the Union. The Constitution is devoid of flowery language. It is simply a manual of how to run the government. Over the years, it has been tweaked, such as senators now being popularly elected instead of appointed by the states, which is originally measured to prevent the federal government from crushing the state's local authority. There's some questions about the 17th Amendment. I'll just stop from there. My observation, and in good faith, it should be that if you want the Senate to be elected by the people, it should be a 10th Amendment cause, not a new constitutional amendment. That's just my opinion, but I'll continue on. Over the years, partly because of commodity and partly because of planning, the rigid decentralization of political power became set in stone. This was one of the things that has made the American Constitution truly unique. The other is the Bill of Rights, which is protection against government overreach. By contrast, in so-called democracies in Europe that look down on America, the people have lost free speech and a free press. The Supreme Court has rigidly upheld the Bill of Rights and the principle of commodity in legal matters not pertaining to the U.S. Constitution, such as how many persons can be in a jury. The Constitution was engineered to protect the public from people like Democrats. It, not the Republicans, saved us in 2020 to 2024. One of the Democrats stated to go is to pack Supreme Court with ideological fanatics who will make censorship and persecution of religious people legal, among other things. However, they are not aware of a defense that the court has, just as has ruled against congressional overreach toward the executive and vice versa. Democrat-controlled government that legislated additional ideological allies to the court could be ruled congressional overreach. Said false judges could not be admitted. The court could conceivably eject judges just like how Congress can eject members. When the United States was first created, European rulers were certain that the United States would follow historical precedent and become a dictatorship, dissolve, or plunge into a civil war. They were proven right in 1860 with regard to a civil war. The Union nevertheless held firm. And the second time was to see an example of what we could be done in other countries. To this day, the American flag has been flown by many peoples and countries oppressed by dictatorships such as Cuba and Hong Kong. At the same time that Democrats burned the flag. So, to sum it up, the experiment has been a success. What's cool, interesting about Armando Simon, he was originally from Cuba. Interesting there. So, And of course, you can look at the war between the states. Respectfully, I won't call it a civil war because those other states in the southern region has separated because they believe it was too much government overreach. Even when you read the Declaration of Independence, it's relevant. But they use the slave thing as later on as a sales pitch. And if you really go look into a lot more deeper, even men like Stonewall Jackson knew he expected slavery to end. So he taught his servants to read and write. He wanted to prepare them. And of course, the state, some of the people in the government told him he can't do that. He just told him where to go. And they want to take down statues of Stonewall Jackson or Robert E. Lee. Come on, folks. Grow up. Do a little homework when you have a chance. But here's the thing. This is just an example. I always say both parties are lefties based on history. Yeah, you considered Abraham Lincoln a progressive for his time. And even too, there's even claims that the Rothschilds, the banksters, were involved in having that separation. To get us divided would be conquered by both ends. I wouldn't be surprised either. So in my personal opinion, that's one of the reasons why Abraham Lincoln got assassinated. So you always got to question these things. But one thing I know for sure, it was a success. Yes, it has its ups and downs. Sometimes you got too much federalization trying to dictate to locals. It can't be done. We got to decentralize a lot more. Keep it consistent. This is why we have the anti-commandeering doctrine. We don't need to go protesting on the streets all the time. We can engage in the political realm on a local level. Plant a seed, not a no tree. That's what I always tell people. Think and act locally. Use the anti-commandeering doctrine. It works, it's effective, and it's constitutional. And you have the freedom of conscience. Don't complain, my friends. Take action. That's our obligation as the American people, regardless where you come from, what you look like, and what you believe. When you dictate to others, then you become a tyrant. And you got people in D.C. and on local levels. I think they're above everybody. Like the big cities, you got the mobsters, and the small towns, small communities, you got the boss hogs. Always defy them, including people in D.C. as well. Do your homework. If you're going to be critical, have merit. Don't be a parrot. Happy birthday, America. 250 years. And we need to go further. Stay vigilant. Decentralize. And use the Constitution, even the states as well, to exercise your rights. You were born with them. Engage. All right. That will be it. I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, recommendations, all that good stuff, whatever you do, please use decorum. Hit me via email to ll3.podcast@proton.me. If you want to donate, go to PayPal or me or cash.app/look3. If you want to support American Thinker, subscribe, share the information, observe responsibly. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love. May your guardian spirits be with you. And have a happy Independence Day.